Be the right club. Be the right club today. Yes!
Again, has to be careful of the speed.
What a comeback season for Hal Sutton.
Come right back toward the hole. Come on in. That's the second eagle he's made it for this week.
17 years later, Hal Sutton is the Players' Champion.
He's got it going right at the flagstick. It'll be up. It is.
Hey everybody, this is episode 7, and it's about effective practice. Chase and I get a lot of questions about how can I practice better? How can I make this work for me? And so we thought we would take an hour to talk to y'all about this. What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, so, I think that's probably the two biggest questions we get from outside of mechanical questions is, how do I practice? Can you come up with a practice plan for me? And I think a lot of people want us to just write a book on or write down just a base practice plan for everybody. But unfortunately, like, we both look at each other, we roll our eyes and we're like, that's not possible. But it's how to practice, and then how do you take that practice to the golf course? We're going to touch on the golf course stuff a little bit today, but it's more so, how do we practice? How do we get better? How do we work on the stuff that your instructor or we're asking our students to work on? And so, to kind of get started into that, there's two types of practice that we're going to talk about today. There's block practice, which is basically hitting the same 7-iron to the same target over and over and over again.
Done a lot of that.
Then there's random practice, and random practice tends to represent it represents the golf course a lot better than the range. As far as with random practice, you're going to hit a driver, you're going to hit a 9-iron, you're going to hit a pitching wedge, a 3-iron, a 5-iron, a hybrid at different targets. Lots of times different lies. You're basically randomizing your practice to the best of your ability. So how when you first think of block practice, how did you when did you apply block practice more?
Well, block practice was when I was trying to make a change.
Yeah.
And there was something in my golf swing that me and my coach deemed wasn't right. And we needed to try to figure out how to do it better. So we'd come up with some whatever the skill that I wanted to develop, whether it was shaft lean or whether it was, get the club not across the line, but down the line at the top. And we'd come up with some drills that would help it. I always hated drills, I'm not going to lie. But let me tell you right now, knowing what I know now, drills are most important. So if your coach is giving you a drill, work on the drill. Most of us are so locked in on the golf ball that we need the golf ball to give us a result. And there's no drill out there that's going to tell us whether we did it right. What do you believe that?
I'm for those of you not watching on YouTube, I'm sitting here nodding my head very, very aggressively because, and it was interesting when we first started working together. When you wanted to go back and play on the Champions Tour. We were grinding on your golf swing a little bit, and it was always interesting to me because you weren't a huge fan of training aids. And you weren't a huge fan, like you wanted to hit the ball and you wanted to hit it full,
right.
Hard. And I think that was your generation relied on seeing what the golf ball did.
Right.
Letting the golf ball test out the theory. Does theory is it valid? Okay, if it's valid, the golf ball is going to fly where I want it to fly. And I think the golf ball, honestly, I think it inhibits us now more than it helps us as far as practicing goes, because there's so many times where, and you see it all the time in here, there's so many times where guys come in and we're working on a movement, just like you said, more shaft lean, or we're working on a little different backswing position. And the guy like most of our guys are coming over the top, big slices. So we get somebody first swing, they come more from the inside. On the video, you can see it immediately, but they hit 4 inches behind the ball, and we're like, yes, good job, yes. And he's like, no, that sucked, that was terrible. I didn't hit that worth the darn. And so that's where I'm like, no, but and that's where we use the tech and all that stuff. Look at the video. Was that better? Man, that was a lot better. Well, if they're just out in the range beating balls, they're never gonna own the change.
One of the things that I do is I try to get them to do it without hitting a golf ball.
Yep.
I spend a lot of time getting them to make a really good practice swing on video so that I can show them the difference. And there's no doubt, everybody out there listening, when you see a good golf swing.
Yep.
And if you can make that good golf swing, you're really proud of that. And that golf ball definitely makes it harder for you to make that good swing, beautiful swing, when you've got other habits already ingrained.
The ball changes things.
The ball changes everything. The minute we can pull the ball away, they can make a good swing. We can put the ball down there, and all of a sudden, what do I do now? What do I do now?
Yeah. So random practice. We talked about random practice, different targets, different clubs. And really with random practice, it's different time as well. So like with block practice, how when you're working on something, you might hit 20 balls in the span of 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You're almost rapid firing per se. With random practice, it gets a little bit more into consistent pre-shot routine, going through your bag, playing. I've heard this talked about a lot, playing the first 3 holes on the range. You hit driver down 1, you hit a wedge on the green or whatever. How did you utilize random practice when you were growing up and playing?
Well, random practice I did on the golf course most of the time. I didn't go out there to try to score. I went out there with 3 or 4 balls in my pocket, and I'd hit different shots all the time. I'd play the hole different ways. So I did a lot of random practice. I think one of the things that I'd really like to tell right now, though, is I'll never forget Hogan Company signed me the first year, and my first assignment was to go to the Ben Hogan Company and talk to Ben Hogan. And so I go into his office, and he says, "Tell me how you practice." And I said, "Well, Mr. Hogan," I said, I usually warm up with short shots, and then I'll hit some wedges and then work my way up to about a 7-iron. And if I'm working on something in my golf swing, I'll hit a lot of shots doing the same thing, trying to ingrain that without missing a beat. He said, "Well, then you don't know anything about practice." And I was pretty offended, to be quite honest with you, because I just got my card, and I can tell you right now, everybody that has ever gotten their card is like, "Oh, I've arrived. What are you talking about? I know something."
Right.
But, this was the great Ben Hogan telling me this. So here's my response. I said, "Well, Mr. Hogan, if you don't think I know how to practice, enlighten me. Tell me what I need to do." And he said, "Well, you've seen me out at Shady Oaks out there, Hal." He said, "I start a foot from the hole, and I keep working myself back until I've holed them all." And I sat there for a second, and I thought, am I really going to say this? And I said, "Well, Mr. Hogan, do I have to hold the drivers too?" And he said, he never cracked a smile. He said, "You know what I mean." So that was really fitting for this moment in practice. But the truth of the matter is, everybody's done it a different way. Let me tell you something. I made the statement the other day that I wished I had grown up on a championship golf course. I actually want to change my mind. I grew up on the best golf course for Hal Sutton to get better, a little 9-hole golf course that didn't have a lot of play. And guess who owned that golf course? Hal Sutton. Yeah. Didn't literally own it, but every day I went out there and I practiced randomly with those balls, hitting lots of different shots. If you don't have that luxury, look for that luxury, because that'll make you a lot better player.
Yeah, or like we've talked about, you'll have to figure out a way to do it on the range.
Yeah.
You'll just have to have a better, or increase imagination to do what you were able to do. What I grew up on the same type of golf course, I could do the exact same thing. The question I get a lot is, man, I was hitting it so good on the range, and then I take it to the golf course and I can't do it. And I think the point that we have to drive home is this idea that if we're hitting the same 7-iron, think about most guys that come in here. They hit one 7-iron, they pull it a little bit, make a little adjustment. Hit the next one, they push it a little bit right, make a little adjustment, until basically they kind of get it dialed in. And they'll hit 50 balls again in the span of 5 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long it takes. where you're only hitting. You might hit 4 7-irons in the span of 4 hours on the golf course.
Right.
So you don't have the luxury of making that same adjustment, and it's basically the time difference that the golf course presents versus the range presents that I think causes the biggest problem. I think that's where, because basically you're basically just you're almost just working out. It's almost like a fitness routine when you're sitting there hitting ball after ball after ball after ball. It's hand-eye coordination at that point. You're just getting a little bit better, getting it grooved in a little bit better. But then you go on the golf course and you hit driver, then you hit a wedge off of a hanging lie, then you hit a chip shot, and then you go to the par 3 and it's a 4-iron or whatever, and you're never hitting that same shot back to back to back to back to back in rapid succession like you do on the range.
Well, that doesn't require the same mental engagement that random practice does.
Yep.
There's choices to be made, there's decisions to be made, and then there's execution.
Yep.
When you're just block practicing, you're not mentally engaged as much, and you're training your muscles basically, but you're not training your mind as much.
Yeah, so and I think that's a good point too. With block practice, and again, we're gonna say that both have their merits. You can't just be a random practicer, you can't just be a block practicer. We need a little bit of both. Random practice is going to tend to be a little heavily based on the result of the shot. Block practice, we're going to recommend, and we'll get into it in a minute, more so the movement pattern, or more so like a pass-fail test on what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
So, you mentioned earlier skill development. You were working on the skill of development of shaft lean or whatever, and I think we need to change the word practice to skill development, especially block practice. So, and the other thing I think we need to point out is, and kind of like, so what worked for Mr. Hogan might not have worked for Hal Sutton. Different skill levels and different players require different types of practice strategies.
No doubt. Beginners don't do the same things, nor do they need to do the same things that a great player needs to do, you know. So, one of the first things that we do when somebody comes in here, we're seeking what their skill level is. We're trying to figure out, okay, what do you do now? What do you want to do? And we're going to basically, after a couple of shots, make up our mind what they're capable of doing.
Correct.
In an hour.
Yep.
And so, we're trying to find out which level do you fit in, the beginner level, the average level, the good level, or the great level.
Yep.
And trust me, we don't have many great levels coming in here. They don't exist a lot, I mean, they're out on the tour, they're making a living with their greatness.
Absolutely.
Most of the people we see that, they're at that good level looking to be great.
Yep, absolutely. So with beginners, most of the time, they're obviously going to need block practice. They're going to need the reps, consistent repetitions. Take something like low point control. So low point control is controlling where the club is bottoming out in the golf swing, every time. That position in the ground. You take a tour pro, you take a Hal Sutton, you've got really good low point control. You don't have any problems with that. But a beginning golfer, even an average golfer that struggles with their irons, they need to go out and really practice their low point control. So an example of that would be take a towel out to the driving range, or especially if your range has mats. Take a towel out, put it on the mat, put the towel on the mat, put the ball about 2 inches in front of the towel. For 30 minutes, locked in practice, can you hit every one of those golf balls without hitting the towel? If you can, awesome. That is, you are developing the skill, the low point. You're developing the skill to control your low point. We don't care where the golf ball goes. And to me, that's a huge point, right? We do not care in this situation where the golf ball goes. If the golf ball goes right at your target every time, awesome. That's great. But if you hit it a little thin, if you hit it a little heavy, if you hit a little pull, if you hit a little push, after every shot, your goal is still the same. And if you hit 50 in a row where you miss the towel, congratulations. That is exactly what we're trying to do. That is developing skill.
Well, this is where most of y'all want to bail out right here because you're too concerned with what the next guy's thinking.
Exactly right.
And he's on a different path than you're on. He's on a different journey than you're on. And you want to look like him, or you want to act like him, or you want to practice like him.
Exactly right.
And all of a sudden, you can't do what you need to do.
Yep.
You agree with that?
100%. 100%. And again, you take, if I'm practicing next to you, a beginner's practicing next to you, you're working on something at a much higher level than they are, and they're not capable of going to that point yet. They're not capable of the beginning golfer's not capable of ripping driver after driver after driver where they want to. They're liable to chunk one, top one. I mean, they have got to focus their attention on one task to get better at it and think of it as a stepping stone to start climbing up the ladder. You did all these tasks X number of years ago when you first picked up a golf club. You're way further along in the journey than they are.
So let me give you all something to think about. Every time you walk on the range, I want you to look at the range, and on the left-hand side of the range will be the worst players, and on the right-hand side of the range will be the best players. Do y'all know why? The reason is because most everybody's right-handed. And the worst players don't want to be seen, so if they go the far as they can go to the left-hand side of the range, nobody's going to see what they're doing. Yep. And the best player on the range will be on the right side because he wants everybody to see what he's doing. Yep. Now, here's another thought. That happens even at the highest level. Let me tell you something. When I first got on the tour, Jack Nicklaus walked on the tee before me, and I walked on the tee, and there was only 2 places to practice. He took the one, and there was only one left on the right-hand side. And I had to wait. I figured out I was going to wait because I didn't want him to be able to watch me and me not be able to see him.
Yep.
I would, if he would allow me to go first, I would have chosen the place on the left-hand side.
That's funny.
I want y'all to think about that from this point forward.
And the interesting part is, Jack Nicklaus didn't really care what you were doing.
That's my point. But I did. I cared what he thought. And that brings us back to the point that don't be worried about what those other people are thinking.
That's exactly right. Chances are, the people you're comparing to probably aren't practicing the way they need to anyway. Not completely. Obviously Jack being a slightly different example. So let's go into the average. So beginning golfer, if it was up to me, I would say 90 to 95% block practice, 5 to 10% random practice. And you brought up a good point too. If you have the ability, you don't have to go to the golf course to shoot a score. You can go practice on the golf course. You can go work on some of the things you need to work on the golf course. Obviously, with COVID and how busy all the golf courses are getting, it's hard to go hit 3 or 4 shots on every hole. But at the same time, you've talked about it, I've talked about it, some of our best practice sessions and stuff were on the golf course.
I was always a really early morning practicer or a late in the afternoon practicer. Golf course wasn't near as busy, and that allowed me to go out and play. When we were playing practice rounds on the tour, we didn't play for a score.
Yeah.
Not one time did we ever. If you'd asked me what I shot in a practice round while I was playing on the tour, I'd have looked at you like, so, what are you talking about? Yeah. Because I was hitting shots from every different place, trying to remind my brain, in case I needed to, how fast that green was going from a certain direction.
Yep, figuring out the golf course.
Yep. And that's random practice right there.
So let's take the average golfer and, just throwing out a random handicap range from, let's just say, 8 to 20, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
How do you think their practice breakdown starts to look compared to the beginning golfer?
Well, I think by the time they become an 8 to a 20 handicapper, they know what their weaknesses and their strengths are.
Okay.
And I think being honest about that. I'm not sure how. I think I'm just not sure how honest you are about it, and that's a whole nother subject right there. But if it were me and I was an 8 handicap trying to get better, I'd be working on what I needed to work on. I'd be getting reps in at this point. We obviously, as an 8 handicapper, we've identified something in their golf swing that if they could do it, it would make them a much better player.
Okay, so let's say this 8 handicap, Joe Schmo 8 handicap comes in, pretty good golf swing, swings at it like he could be pretty much a scratch golfer. So in our minds, immediately we're going, okay, we got some, not mental issues, that sounds terrible, but we've got some things that we've got to discuss as far as pre-shot routine, committed to the shot, course management strategies, like all that stuff. So How would you recommend somebody at home that feels like they're, on the range, they can hit it pretty good, but still not scoring the way that they think they should be scoring? How can they practice and get better at, say the commitment side or say pre-shot routine or any of that stuff?
I spent a lot of time on the golf course by myself. That's what I did, I mean, when we were out at Big Easy Ranch, what I would do is take kids out, and I'd take my phone with me, and I'd time how long they were taking for different shots. You can't believe the difference that having a routine that you followed all the time. If you're taking too long, you're thinking about too many things. You're second guessing everything you're doing. Yeah. I can tell you, every tour player is not second guessing. If they're second guessing, they're going to put the club back in the bag and start over again. All of those things can make an 8 handicapper that's got a pretty good golf swing a better player.
You made a point one time and said, a lot of guys on tour, they all swing a little bit differently, but one thing that they do better than your scratch golfers or your higher handicaps is they pick a plan and they commit to. Their commitment level is way better than your average player.
Commitment is everything. I mean, I've talked about that on Twitter a lot. I mean, how committed are you to doing whatever you're doing, whether it's your practice or whether it's the shot you're fixing to hit in a tournament? You have to be committed to something. Yep. You have to have a destination. And if you can't be committed to that, and I can tell you right now, let's talk about commitment for a minute. You've gotten up over a putt. Let's just take a left or right putt that's 6 feet and it's downhill, and you pick a line, you say, okay, it's 2 inches left of the hole. You step up over the putt, you got your putter down there, you take your last look, and your last look says, I'm not sure it's going to break that much. Not a single one of you back away. All of you just decommit at that point, actually commit to nothing, and you've left it all to chance. And how many times do you make it? None. I can tell you, a decision made, a commitment to see it through to the end will produce better results over the long haul, without a doubt.
100%. Absolutely 100%. So if we go back to the 8 handicap, got to work on, let's say we've identified pre-shot routine and commitment level. You talked about commitment with the putt. Great analogy. So commitment level. Remember that practice is skill development. So this particular player needs to better develop his skill of picking a plan, executing the plan, committing to the plan, and just green light go, right? So, how would a practice session, let's say on the range, let's say his golf course is packed, he didn't have time, he's got 30 to 45 minutes, he wants to go out and practice. How can he practice, working on his commitment, pre-shot routine, all that stuff?
Well, every time, let me walk out on the range to begin with. Just walk out there with me. The first thing I'm going to do is, where's the wind blowing? And I'm going to position myself, if I can, where the wind is blowing the direction I want to work on whatever I'm trying to work on.
Okay.
And for me, the best wind for me to really work on what I wanted to work on was into me off of the right side. And once I got in position to do whatever I was wanting to work on, then I would commit to something that I was going to work on. I'd hit shot after shot with whatever club I was hitting with that, and I would hold my finish. I'd evaluate it finish. Did I do what I wanted to do? So many of the time, we'll ask people in here, whatever we're working on, we'll say, did you do it?
Right. But in this particular case, if you're, let's say, you started struggling a little bit with your pre-shot routine and your, a little bit of your commitment to the shot, how would you work on that on the range? How would you go through, is it like some of the times we'll have players say it out loud. What are you trying to do? Like, what's the plan here? And like, okay, back left pin, going to hit this shot, and go through the whole routine of locking in and doing it for 30 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I did it subconsciously, but you're really wanting people to be conscious of what they're doing. And, I did it so much, you did it so much.
As we developed
the skill, we didn't have to think about it. We knew we were doing it or we weren't doing it.
Yep.
But for this 8 handicapper, the truth of the matter is you have to do this on every shot for a while. I mean, you have to have a commitment and then execute and then ask yourself the question, did I do it?
Not where the ball went.
Not where the ball went, but did I do what I was trying to do, whatever that is?
Was I committed to?
And we have to trust that if we do finally own this, whatever we're working on, that the ball will do what we want it to do.
Correct.
And that trust factor is a big thing, because we see a lot of people bail out because the ball doesn't do what
100%.
Doesn't do what we want it to do.
So in this case, would you recommend videoing from start to finish and then trying to get the time to be pretty consistent as far as the time, pull the club, go through the full routine, from start to contact?
If they have the ability to do that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just video and face on and or down the line or whatever, and then just basically seeing from at the start of I pulled the club at 10 seconds and I hit it at 40 seconds, so that 30 seconds is kind of a, there's been plenty of talk of Tiger and Jim Furyk and all those guys. They were within a second or two on just about every shot.
I think most of the guys out there are.
Yeah.
Whether they're slow or fast, they're slow or fast each day they go out there. And but they have these checkpoints in their head that they're trying to go through.
Right.
And, those checkpoints are, like I said, when I walked on the range, where's the wind blowing?
Yep.
That was one of the first things that I thought about. Is it downhill shot or uphill shot? If you go on a range and you're hitting uphill, I can guarantee you right now that's going to influence you to hang back and to try to help the ball get in the air. Yeah. I always played better when I was hitting downhill, and I bet a lot of y'all feel the same way, because you feel more freedom to transfer your weight.
Yeah.
And you don't feel like you have to help the ball in the air.
So for the average golfer, your 8 to whatever handicap, what breakdown of, and again, these are very general assumptions and estimates, but what breakdown of block versus random practice do you think most of these guys fall into?
That's hard to say, really, to be honest with you. I think it varies from player to player. I mean, this comes back to being honest with yourself. I mean, do you have a good golf swing and you need to be randomly practicing? Or do you have needs in your golf swing that you need to be making changes? You got a good coach and he's helping you learn how, or he or she is helping you learn what you need to block practice on.
Yeah.
I mean, and that could change from week to week, month to month.
Yep. And I'll say this: anybody out there that says that you can only be a random practicer or you can only be a block practicer, they're both really good. So there's times and situations for both. And I don't, there's very few absolutes in golf. That's one thing I've learned over the years. So you're a scratch golfer, and again, practice is skill development. I'm gonna keep reiterating that point. So your scratch golfer, has trouble flighting the golf ball. And I'm not saying all scratch golfers do, but we'll say your zero handicap comes in, launching it way too high, even some low point issues at times, hitting behind the ball, all that stuff. How do you recommend they go out and practice?
A lot of random practice in my mind.
Okay.
And I'd go out on the golf course and I'd figure out where I wanted to flight the ball, whatever it was. And I'd pull the club that would allow me to do that. And most of the time, that's more club than you need rather than less club than you need. And that's why we struggle with a lot of scratch handicappers that don't know how to flight the ball, because they're trying to max out on every swing. And the guys that could really flight the ball never swung at it full bore. They, 75 or 80%. They sometimes choke down. I saw a lot of guys that choked down on the club a little bit. I never was one of those guys. I slowed center down. If I was trying to flight the ball, I'd pull more club than I needed and I'd slow center down.
Yep.
But there's a variety of different ways to do it. You need to figure out who you are and do what works best for you.
One of my favorite drills to do was to go to the par threes and to hit 3 different clubs on the par threes. So you'd hit, whether it was 2 clubs that were longer than the stock club or even one that was shorter where you had to kind of step on it and try and hit a bigger rope draw in there or whatever. But I've always felt like that was a good way to kind of, again, vary speed and vary trajectory. Another idea would be, if you've got a bunch of trees at the golf course or overhanging trees at the golf course, go get behind one of the trees that you've got to kind of flight one underneath or whatever. Again, and if you're applying this on the range, it is not about where the ball goes every time. It is about, did you hit it as high or as low in this particular case as you wanted to? A lot of times these are pass fails of, did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, not did the ball go exactly where you want to go. The ball can trick you in a lot of these instances.
Well, I hate to go back to the same story that I was telling earlier about Mr. Hogan. When we finally settled down in there and I was like listening to him about how to practice, he compared it to a 6-story building. And he said, Hal, when I really know what I'm doing, I can go through whatever window I want to with whatever club I want to.
Yeah.
Then you've really arrived when you can do that. And I will tell you that the better player that you ever run into will be able to do that more so. Yeah. And you are a limited player if you can't do that. And most people resist working on that because they don't get the feedback all the time that they want. And here's what we're all seeking: feedback. We want to succeed. We want to pass. And the truth of the matter is, if we're failing, or what we think is failing, or we're not passing, we don't want to work on that anymore. Yeah. And that's what you need to be working on.
That's exactly right. The other thing I think we need to kind of change our mindset in the fact that if you tend to hit a fade or tend to hit a slice, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily a weakness. It means that you've developed the skill to hit a fade or a slice.
Right.
Because if you get a guy that's hitting big hooks and can't keep from snap hooking it off the planet, he would love to know how to hit a slice.
Right.
And so your skill, you've just developed more skill into slicing the ball. So you've got to add the skill development to figuring out how to hit a draw, figuring out how to hit a hook. And so to me, there's too much of a goal or a focus on being perfect, hitting perfect golf shots when we practice, and trying to hit that one shot instead of saying, look, I don't hit it high. I don't hit it as high as I want to. I'm really good at hitting it low. So I'm going to really work on, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to go experiment, give myself permission. You talk about permission a lot. Give myself permission to experiment with, how am I going to get this thing up in the air? What do I need to do? We're kids again. Go out and have, have a childlike imagination, and I'm going to throw this thing up in the air. I'm going to hook this thing as much as I can. We did all that as kids, and you see all these adults that they're afraid to lose their golf swing if they try and do something out of their norm. And to me, it's terrible.
So that's a great point, Chase. As a kid, we have nothing to base anything on. We're still learning, and we admit that we don't know everything. I mean, we probably don't admit it, but the truth is we know we don't. Yeah. And we're trying to learn, so we're trying all these different things. And then all of a sudden, as we become an adult and we have something that we feel like we can count on, whether it's that big slice or that big hook or whatever it is, you kind of think that's your fingerprint, and you're afraid to deviate from that. I mean, we catch a lot of people in here that are afraid of change. Even though they know they need change, yep, they're still afraid of change.
Yep.
And, to me, the experimentation of, like you're talking about, of if you can't get it in the air, figure out how you can get it in the air. If you hit it 9 miles high and you can't hit it low, go out there, find a tree, and keep it under the tree. Figure out what it takes to do that.
Because the golf course will ask you to do that. The skill development, that's why practice, again, is skill development, because the golf course will force you, it's going to find your weaknesses. And there's going to be plenty of times under certain situations where, like, if you don't have a fade in the bag, you got to hit a big fade around a tree and you don't have it, well, failure. You're not going to succeed.
Right.
So let's spend just a second on the great player. Again, they're all different. Everybody's a little bit different. We completely understand that. But what are some of the pitfalls that the great player needs to watch out for with regards to practice? And
I think the biggest pitfall that a great player needs to forget is trying to be perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just be honest. Every great player out there that asks a coach to come on board, that coach wants to put his fingerprint on it too, and so he's going to describe whatever he thinks is perfect. And if you ask 3 coaches over here, they're going to give you 3 different answers on what's perfect. And, you know, I fell victim to that. You know, I chased perfect for a while. You know, I'd read articles in there, well, Hal will never be able to do this because he can't do this. So guess what I went to do? Figure out how to do that.
Yep.
And pretty soon, I mean, I was already really good. So pretty soon I didn't even know who I was anymore. And so to be great, I think a great player has to have a coach. I think most of the time that coach loves him, not just because he's getting paid, but because he likes him as a person. And he wants to see him succeed, not for the coach's personal gain, but for the player's personal gain. And when you've got that, you can get an objective opinion, you get forgiveness, you get trust, you get a lot of things, your family at that point. And then all of a sudden the player, the great player, begins to get all those things back from the coach. And now you're seeking what y'all think is the best version of you. It may not be perfect in anybody's mind, but you know what we talk about around here a lot is we want the best version of whoever walks in the door. We don't know what that is.
Yep. No, it's good. I remember I tell many tour players that come in all the time, when I didn't grow up with a driving range. You know, I grew up on a little small community golf course, and when I moved to the Oklahoma City area and had access to a really good golf course, Oak Tree National. It was one of the first times that I had access to a range all the time, and I remember this was late in my playing career when I was already a mental head case. I was too much of a mental head case at that point, but I would sit on the range. I'll never forget this. I would sit on the range and hit balls till I hit a bad shot, so I had something to fix. Like, because I had it. It was so deep in my mind that there was something physically wrong with my golf swing that was going to produce a bad shot in the most intense situations, that I'd sit there, good shot, hook, oh, there it is. That's the one I got to fix.
So let me tell you the opposite side of that. I went to see Harvey Pinnock, and Harvey Pinnock said, Hal, he said, let me tell you what I think you ought to do. You close your practice session out with 2 drivers. If you hit them both good, don't hit anymore. I said, why is that, Mr. Pinnock? He said, because you're just waiting on hitting one bad.
That's exactly what I was doing.
And which is what you were doing.
Yep.
And he said, if you hit 2 of them good, he said, a good player doesn't have but 16 or 17 really good drivers in their bag for a day. So don't throw them all away on the driving range.
That's such a good point. You hit 10 good ones, so now you only got 6 on the golf course.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. You know, and I think a lot of it as our players, we've got a bunch of good college players that are developing and getting, you know, have aspirations of playing professionally. And we always say, look, the better you get, the harder this gets. It gets harder. And to me, my results defined me so much that, I mean, if I spent 3 or 4 or 5 hours on the range, I'd go home and I was just worn out, and I knew I didn't get any better. I didn't get any better that day. I hit a ton of great shots, but the 3 or 4 or 15 bad ones I hit were completely implanted in my brain, and so I knew I had something to work on the next day. I mean, it was an asinine, completely vicious cycle that was making me worse and worse and worse. And as I got away from professional golf and got into the business as a teacher, my play I became a better player immediately, because I wasn't defined by the world's expectations of me trying to play professional golf.
Well, to that point, I think when I was playing golf, I had one side of the game figured out, and that was how to play golf. You know, there's a whole nother side of the game of how to develop a player. I'm not sure that I didn't accidentally develop. I think today's players don't accidentally develop. The best players, there's a plan from the get-go. They get in with a good teacher, and somebody has a plan.
Yeah, more resources.
Yeah, more resources and everything else in order for them to do that. And, you know, kids today have such an incredible opportunity compared to what we had in my generation. And when we literally, the random practice, that was our technology.
That was it. Yeah.
That was it. That's all we had.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess I feel lucky that I ever did develop anything. Yeah. I watch what we have access to now with all the technology and how much information it gives us.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you know, it's easier, but yet it's not.
Yeah, it's still hard.
It's still hard. The game is still hard.
Yeah, it's still tough. going back to, I'm going to say this a couple more times. When we're practicing, when we're out on the court, when we're out on the range, it's not always about the result. And we talk again a lot about pass fail. And one of the areas I want to kind of segue to is short game and chipping and even the putting yips to some extent, but more so chipping yips. We've had a ton of players come in recently, older generation that I personally think got absolutely screwed with equipment changes. I've said this a million times. A little off topic here, but I think changing from the balata ball, the square grooves, to a Pro V or these balls that don't spin as much and more V-shaped grooves made it really hard on a generation that grew up hitting chip shots and pitch shots a certain way with lots of speed and lots of shaft lean to then completely change how they're really hitting chip shots now. But we get a lot of players that come in and they're really yippy. They get completely ball bound. We've said it a couple times like this. They're a slave to the golf ball. And one of the things that I'm a big stickler on is, can you make 2 or 3 really good practice swings where your turf interaction is really good, contact with the ground is great, because in the end, chipping, really how you enter in the ground and get out of the ground is it. How your interaction with the ground is the answer to good, consistent chip shots. Can you do it 3 or 4 times? Yeah, I can do it 3 or 4 times. And then they get over the ball, and it's a completely different shot. It's a different speed, different tension, different all that stuff. And so we've had a lot of success really focusing on, can you do the same thing every time? Can you hit this shot with, let's just say, a 1 out of 10, 10 being a lot of tension, 1 being no tension at all? Can you go from setup, backswing, impact, finish, and maintain tension the whole time? Can your brain be on cruise control versus a heart rate monitor that's going beep, 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 and going all over the place? And to me, that's where this whole pass-fail thing comes into play. Did you do what you wanted to do versus did you let the ball dictate your reaction to, did the result dictate, oh, well, I didn't do it right because I didn't hit it solid, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that?
Well, he's talking directly to me, just so y'all know. I mean, I struggle chipping. There's no 2 ways about it. I struggle chipping, and he's right about a lot of things. There's even one thing that we have now that we didn't have then is the way the agronomy is done now. I mean, the fairways are so tight, and you have to be so precise. And in a lot of my days, the fairways weren't cut as tight. The ball had a little bit of cushion. I'm going to describe this for you. Zoysia grass. I bet all y'all like it out there because the ball sets up a little bit better, and it allows you to be not perfect. But another thing that might help y'all is, and you'll understand this, he's talking about being a slave to the ball and result-oriented. If I told you I want you to chip it within 3 feet of the hole, and then this next time I tell you, just get it on the green. Just chip it on the green. You'll not nearly as much a slave to that ball and a slave to the result if all I ask you to do is chip it on the green.
Yep.
But if I say chip it within 3 feet of the hole, all of a sudden it's like, oh, now, the test has got tighter boundaries now.
That's exactly right.
And I know y'all can all relate to what we're talking about right now. If you're a golfer, you can relate to this.
Yeah. Is your, I always go back to, is your contact with the ground consistent? Can you make 3 or 4 practice swings where contact with the ground is good on all 3 or 4 swings? And if it's consistent every time, then you can do the same thing over a golf ball. But again, for some, that ball's just sitting there looking up at us, and it plays mind tricks on us.
Yep. It sure has me. I can tell you that.
And you've talked about, hitting chip shots or even making full swings with your eyes closed, just to kind of, again, feel what you're trying to feel. That's the thing. I think, to me, a theme we could talk about is there's just not enough focused practice. You've got to get your brain wrapped up in you're going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish versus just blindly hitting shots.
Well, I asked you earlier before we ever started the podcast, how many times did you, without a ball, just take a practice swing, whatever you're trying to do, whether it's a chip shot, and do it in slow motion and feel it?
Yep.
We're this feel a lost art, That's part of what we're doing,
Yep.
And we so much of the time we're looking at a monitor or we're looking at data or we're looking at this. none of that is feel. Shut your eyes and imagine what you're trying to do. Feel where you're at. I mean, if you can't see it and you're having to feel it, you know what your body's doing.
Yep. And especially if you go slow.
Yeah.
Ripping at full speed, it's really hard to feel any change or any new movement pattern.
I hate swinging at it full. I'm not going to lie to you. When I played the tour, I had to be forced into swinging at it full.
Yep.
And, I hated it when I had to because I knew I had less control over it when I did. I mean, I get caught up in the same thing y'all get caught up in. I want to hit it further. I'm going the wrong direction. I'm going backwards just because of my age. But the truth of the matter is I still have the desire to be longer than I am right now. Yeah. And that means I've got to go faster in order to do that. And, that's almost alien to me. It's almost like, Hal, you have never done this. That's uncharted waters.
Yep. It's tough. So let's talk about one of the things I struggled with. Let's say we're practicing putting. I didn't practice enough, and I don't mean I didn't spend enough time on my putting. I've been reading a book that kind of shed the light a little bit on this topic to me, put it kind of in a different perspective. And it's a book. His name's VJ Trolio. It's only one shot. It's really about raising junior golfers. It's a book written to parents about raising junior golfers. But I actually think he gave the book to you, and I saw it on your desk and read it, and it's really good. Highly recommend it, especially for parents out there with junior golfers. But one thing he said was that practice isn't testing. And at first I was like, I didn't really know what he meant, but he goes on to say, going out and making 10 3-footers in a row or 50 3-footers in a row or 100 3-footers in a row is not practice. That is testing. And I look back at me putting, man, I tested all the time. That's all I did. Instead of, we talked about earlier, let's say you fight hitting pulls, you're pulling your putts. How do we go about practicing that? Well, go to a 3-footer. Make sure your alignment is perfectly dead on a straight 3-footer, perfectly dead square center of the hole, and putt for 10 minutes trying to hit it into the right edge. So if I'm pulling my putts, I've developed the skill. I'm better at closing the face. So I've got to do something to control the face. It doesn't mean that I'm terrible at putting. It means that my stroke is more developed and something in my stroke is causing the face to be a little bit left at impact. And so I've got to add the skill to push putts, and so that's face control basically. Mm-hmm. Instead of me hitting, I could hit 49 perfect putts and hit one bad and miss and not test, not pass the test, and then I've got negative feedback. Now I suck. Instead, no, it's, man, I did 49 really, really good, and I just happened to miss that one. Did you do the same thing? Did you do something similar?
You don't even need to ask that question. You already know the answer. Just like everybody else out there, you do the same thing. You know why we do that? Because we get positive feedback, because we can make more 3-footers than we can make 8-footers. We can make more 8-footers than we make 15-footers. We can make more 15-footers than we make 30-footers. We've got a really good player that I went and watched him play golf, and I watched him practice, and he hit 3-footers, 6-footers, 8-footers, 15-footers. 3-putted several times on the golf course from 30, 40 feet. And he thought the key to not 3-putting was making the 6-footer. He didn't practice enough 30-footers to get it in there a foot.
Yeah,
I will guarantee you that most of y'all don't practice enough long putts. And the reason why you don't is because you don't ever make any of them. That's how result-oriented you are. But that 30-footer is a big part of the game, trust me.
Yeah, so putting to the edge of a green or putting to a tee or putting to, just trying to get the skill. And so, that's, to me, if I could go back, I would have, my dad made me putt we had to do a lot of lag putting, which was really good. I became a really good putter, but I would have not stood there and hit putt after putt after putt after putt after putt in the hole. I would have worked on my stroke and tried to get my stroke more consistent versus testing all the time. Now, there's a place for testing, but I think I would have tried to figure out ways to practice either the rhythm of my stroke or either face control or the specifics of the stroke versus, again, trying to pound 103 footers in the hole.
Well, to that point, I've seen plenty of players go out on the practice green and they would tell me I didn't practice the 30 or 40 footers because there were too many people in the way to do that.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you all something. This may sound elementary to you, but they cut around the edge of the green, and then they cut the rest of the green. The whole green is cut. You don't have to putt to a hole.
Yeah, right.
You only putt to a hole so that you can get the feedback that you're looking for.
Yep.
You can, like Chase mentioned a minute ago, you can putt to the edge of the green, or you can putt to somewhere else on the green. But we like putting to a hole because we want to see the ball go in the hole.
Yep.
And that's the whole Chase's point. We don't have to test all the time. We're really trying to figure out the speed of the green.
Yep.
And are you really doing that, or are you really trying to just make putts?
That's exactly right. So how do we as players from, again, beginners, and more so probably average, good, great, how do we assess? How do we assess our weaknesses? How do we, and really the question is, how do we get better? We get better by assessing our weaknesses. How do we do that?
Well, we got to be honest with ourselves, and that's one of the points that I think most everybody, I always had trouble being honest with myself.
Yep.
I mean, I think if all of y'all are honest, you'll say, I give myself the benefit of the doubt. It's just an easier way to go through life.
Especially if you're younger.
Yeah, especially if you're younger. And, I mean, my dad always, or whoever I was working with, forced me to look at the truth and reality. And so I would say a good team, that might be your parents, that might be a coach. Probably there is a coach in there somewhere. And someone that can be really honest with you. I developed some really good friendships. There was a couple of times on the tour that Nick Price said, hey, Hal, you need to do this, And, if Nick told me that, I believed it. And so find somebody that can help you be honest with yourself.
And one of the things you can do too is there's a lot of good stat tracking apps that will really give you an idea. It's basically like ShotLink for the PGA Tour. They'll really give you an idea. We've talked about that in a couple other episodes, but we'll really give you an idea of what your weaknesses are. So if you're a 5 handicap trying to improve and you get some of these, Scott Fawcett and Decade does a good job. Game Forge, there's a few of them out there. But you're a 5 handicap and you enter in all your stats and start tracking rounds and you realize, man, I'm a 10 handicap from 100 to 125 yards. I didn't even realize that. Like a lot of times it's getting something in place to where you can track it enough to realize what your weaknesses are.
And to that point right there, I will guarantee you the tour average is much higher than you think it is. I mean, we have people coming here all the time that hit it, 20 feet with a certain club and they think that was a bad shot. And it's like tour average is further than that. Yeah. They're just not really, they don't know what the truth is.
Yeah, last couple of years, tour average from 100 yards, 100 to 125 is like 20 feet, 22 feet.
Right.
Like it's, the best was like at 17 feet, 16 feet, 18 feet. Like it's not that close. And so parents, if you have a junior that's aspiring to be great, be a little lenient on them at times. Like those guys out there are really good, but they're not good every shot they hit or every tournament they play in or every day. They do struggle too.
So a truth is, your hero, whoever that is, on the golf course, I will guarantee you, if you saw it in person, he's not as good as you actually have envisioned him being.
Yep.
That's just the truth.
So one of the last questions I have is, how do we take our range game to the golf course? And so I want you to, I kind of want to hear your take on from a tour standpoint of, you hear the word or the saying Ranger Rick. Were there guys on tour that were incredibly gifted on the range, but it didn't show up as much on the course? Didn't show up as much in tournaments?
Yeah, well, there were. I mean, there is. No matter what we, whatever we come up with that we want to look for, there is somebody that fits that criteria.
Yeah.
The guys that I felt like that didn't know whether they were on the range or on the golf course, they looked the same wherever they were at, were the guys that focused on the process more than the product. And they took the process out there with them. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, you go see Bob Rotella. I've spent a lot of time with Bob Rotella, and he's going to harp on that process. And that's what kids do. That's when they say be childlike, that's what a kid is doing. He's looking for the process that will help him hit it over that tree, or he's looking for the process that will help him hit it under the tree. Yep. He's experimenting for the process. He's not experimenting for the result. And we as adults already feel like we know what that process is, and we're experimenting for the product.
Man, that's good. And then when we screw up, we're beating ourselves up. Where the kid's like, it's okay, I'll get that up and down.
Right.
I don't care. I'll make the 8-footer.
They forgive themselves. You know, I mean, I use two terms in here a lot. You've heard me: permission and forgiveness.
Yep.
I mean, listen, we need to give ourselves permission to change. If we've recognized that there's a change we need to make, we have to give ourselves permission to do it.
Yep.
And then the last thing is, we know we're not going to do it all the time.
Yep.
We got to forgive ourselves. You know, okay, I didn't do it that time. I'll do it this time. And, you know, instead of beating ourselves up.
That's exactly right.
I mean, the world beats you up enough.
and golf's going to beat us up enough. We say it all the time. Golf's hard. Like any of you parents that have got kids coming that you want to get them into golf, it's the hardest sport to get great at. It's the hardest sport to be super consistent at. It's just brutal. One of the things that I want to mention is you'll get a lot of guys that, again, come in here, man, I was just peering on the range, just hitting it great on the range and just had it dialed in. But I still can't take it to the golf course. And here's what I'll say. If you've hit 3 or 4 really good shots, say you're working on something and you're like, man, I got this dialed in, take a break. What I mean by that is go walk to the golf cart, go walk to the bench and get a drink of water, go put the club in the bag and count to 25 seconds, and then go back and get a different club. Change it up a little bit, because again, you're finding a rhythm that rhythm does not exist on the golf course. You're never going to hit 3 shots in a row unless you hit the first 2 in the water. You know what I mean? Like you're never on the golf course are you going to hit 3 perfect shots in a row in the span of a minute or 40 seconds. So break up the time. The difference between range work and the golf course is the time between the shots. A lot of it is different clubs, but it's mainly you hit a drive, you hop in the cart, you drive for 40 seconds, you get out, you go do it again under a different set of circumstances. So break up the rhythm that you found, and that's a way for you to kind of test yourself. If you're working on something new and you hit 5 good ones in a row, go take a break for a minute or two, go call your wife or make a phone call or whatever, and then come back. And if you can do it to that same level, that next shot back, in my opinion, now you got something. Versus what you'll mostly find is that next one coming back feels a little different and you got to kind of find it again.
Couldn't agree with you more, Chase. You know, when you're practicing shot after shot after shot, you're not thinking, no one's disturbing your thinking or anything else. If you hit a good shot on the golf course and you got to walk to the next shot, your playing partner's going to talk to you about the weather. He's going to talk to you about fishing last week or exactly. Whatever else. And you're distracted and you get up there, how good you are moving from distraction to back into focus. That's a big part of the golf course. I can tell you, I saw tour-level players that could not do that.
Exactly right.
You know, I was known as stoic and not changing much. And the reason is because I couldn't talk about everything under the sun and stay focused on what I was trying to do. And I wasn't out there to have a good time. I was out there to compete. And, you know, I figured out what I had to do to be the best version of me. And, you know, Lee Trevino or Fuzzy Zeller were opposites. You know, they laughed, they joked, they talked about things with the crowd and everything else. They were able to focus that way, and more power to them. I wished I could have been that way, but find out who you are.
That's really good. That's kind of our art of scoring.
Yes,
is being able to handle the distractions and the circumstances. You know, the last thing I would say is this art of practicing and this how to effectively practice is be mentally locked in, and we got kids that'll go out on the range for 6 hours. 6 hours of uncommitted practice is way worse. That is not near as good as 30 minutes of committed practice. If you can lock in and again go pass fail on what you're trying to do, whether it's again pre-shot routine, low point control, hitting it lower, hooking it, slicing it, hitting it higher, whatever it is, 30 minutes where you're completely locked in, no distractions, as Hal said. We live in a distracted world, so that's really difficult to do, but no distractions for 30 minutes. And you can literally check the box on if you did what you were trying to do or didn't do what you were trying to do. You're going to have much more success. And some of this practice does not have to be done with a ball. You can be with a club, with a grip, you just making, air swings in the mirror at home. As long as you're locked into the feels and locked into what you're trying to do, you have a decent game plan and you're trying to implement it, you'll have results. You'll have good success.
Couldn't agree more. We'll close with this one thing. This is another Ben Hogan story. Jackie Burke, being a good friend, told me that he was leaving that day, and he had shot 67, I think it was, and he looked out on the range. The only guy on the range was Ben Hogan. And Ben Hogan had shot 65 that day and was leading the golf tournament. He said, I'm driving out, and the only guy on the range was the guy that shot the lowest score. He said, there's something wrong with this. So he put his car in park, and he walked out on the driving range and sat down on Ben Hogan's bag, watching Ben Hogan hit balls. Ben Hogan was working on something, didn't tell Jackie what he was working on, and he topped the first one that Jackie was watching him, and the next one he hit really thin. And Jackie said, what are you doing? He looked around. He said, I'm working on something. He didn't tell him what he was working on. In a few minutes, he started hitting the ball great and never did tell Jackie what he was working on. And the next day, he saw him. He said, how'd you play? He said, I shot 66 or whatever, another good score. He said, but what I was working on yesterday didn't make it to the golf course. I left it on the driving range. So there's one of the greatest players of all times. He was experimenting after he was one of the greatest players in the world. And then on top of that, he recognized the difference between the driving range and the golf course. He knew, I can't take that to the golf course yet. I don't own it, so it's not going with me. Good lesson there.
I've got to perform, and I'm going to perform with what I'm comfortable with.
Exactly.
That's great, man. Good, always good stuff. I love we all love the Hogan stories
Well, I'm lucky that I got to know him a little bit, and I don't know that anybody really knew him, but he was nice enough, kind enough to tell me a few things, and then I've gotten to be better friends with Jackie, and Jackie and Mr. Hogan were pretty good friends. Sure. So Jackie's told me a lot of stories about him.
Awesome. Well, as always, thanks for tuning in. Check us out, like and subscribe, podcast on all the platforms. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Hal Sutton Golf, halsuttongolf.com, Chase Cooper Golf on Instagram. Let us know if you guys have any comments, thoughts, new topics you want us to discuss. We'll definitely take a listen and would be glad to share what we know about any of the topics you guys want us to cover. Hal, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chase. We're still learning too. We're just conveying what we've already been through.
That's right. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Be the right club today. Yes!